climate change and managing the energy ecosystem is obviously a global challenge. So we need to hear more from other countries about how they manage these issues. Of course, each country has unique political and economic systems, unique culture, even a unique language. But that's how innovation works. We learn from each other. We learn from disparate solutions to similar and sometimes even different challenges. So today we're going to find out what we can learn from the US neighbor to our north, Canada, from one of the top women there in the energy and environment sector. And I'm really excited about this. This is a real treat. So stay put on your earbuds, prepare to take notes too. You might get some ideas from our discussion. So you never know. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We bring you insights and stories and tips and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, climate, and ESG related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes articles as well. And please pass it on to your friends. And if you're so inclined, leave us a 5-star review because it helps other people find us. And we love fan mail. If you are at an inflection point yourself, looking for support with your ESG work or your career, please reach out to me. All the chaos swirling around us, there's also a lot of opportunity, and we don't want you to be flailing or miss out. So please reach out to me on Twitter at Joan Michelson and let me know. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. This episode is brought to you by Competent Boards, a comprehensive training program for board members and aspiring board members. I'm doing the Sustainability and ESG Designation and Certification Program myself. I'm also faculty. The group is truly global in perspective, and who's in the group? It's an extraordinary group of people that is not normally accessible. Gives you the skills, strategic perspective, and confidence needed for today's boardrooms, especially around the kinds of issues we talk about on electricladiespodcast.com. You can find them on competentboards.com. So Canada has a goal of reaching net zero emissions by 2050, like many other countries and companies. To help decarbonize its electric grid, the Canadian federal government is also finalizing clean energy regulations and has established federal investment tax credits to help drive the adoption of renewables. These are similar, I think, to the efforts being taken here in the US. But this is also an election year in Canada, as it is in the US and around 60% of the globe. And elections bring uncertainty. The head of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association said that uncertainty is hampering adoption of renewables because investors aren't sure which policies, regulations, and financial incentives will stay or be overturned in a short time as a result of the election. But nonetheless, climate change is not waiting for anybody's elections. Climate change is not waiting for investors or companies to seize market opportunities. We have to do this now with what we do know. So what can we learn from Canada? Let's find out. I'd like you to meet Claire Seaborn, who until a few months ago was Chief of Staff to Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, where, among other things, she was in the hot seat. She developed Canada's clean electricity strategy, critical minerals strategy, and sustainable jobs plan. Say that 3 times fast. Now she's an attorney at Torrey's law firm focused on, guess what? Energy, mining, and infrastructure. Gee, what a shock. Prior to becoming Chief of Staff to the Energy Minister, Claire was Director of Policy and Legal Affairs to Canada's Minister of Infrastructure and Communities. Her role as Chief of Staff seems to have tapped that experience because she helped advance Canadian infrastructure policy to make progress on Canada's climate plan and established Canada's Infrastructure Bank, which hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about. Her work has touched on all types of policy and legal issues related to infrastructure, public transit, clean energy, you get the point. She also worked at another global law firm in commercial arbitration and investor disputes in the energy and construction sectors before, and I could go on and on and on about her background. You can look it up. She also spent 6 months here in the U.S., where I am in D.C. at the Canadian Embassy, focused on similar issues, and earned her law degree from the University of Ottawa and her bachelor's degree from the University of British Columbia. One more point before we get into our conversation. A favorite part of Claire's background to me is that she was recently recognized as an emerging leader by both the Clean 50 Awards and the Women's Infrastructure Network. Yay! I had the distinct pleasure of meeting Claire live and in person here in DC a few weeks ago, and am thrilled to have you meet her today. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Claire Seaborn to Electric Ladies Podcast. Welcome, Claire. Yay. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much, Joan.
So first of all, I got to ask you, what is a day in the life of the Chief of Staff of a Canadian minister like? And by the way, feel free to correct anything I got wrong in the introduction.
No, your introduction was perfect, Joan. I loved it. Thank you. It was very, very kind and very generous. I will start by saying I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it's very exciting to be a guest on it. Being a chief of staff is a very difficult role to describe because it's so multifaceted. It involves so many different tasks, responsibilities, relationships, that when I describe them, most people look at me in disbelief. But somehow the people who do those jobs manage, and that's often why they don't do them for very long. The average time that someone spends as a chief of staff in the public or the private sector is usually 18 to 24 months. I lasted for about 2 years and 3 months or so before I was ready to go back to practicing law. But as a chief of staff, I was supporting Jonathan Wilkinson, who's Canada's Minister of Energy. And a minister is the equivalent of a secretary in the United States. So he's the equivalent to Secretary Granholm, by comparison. The biggest difference, though, is that unlike Secretary Granholm, Minister Wilkinson not only leads his department, he also has a seat in our legislature, in our House of Commons, and he represents a riding in the country and has to be elected. So he actually plays this dual role of being both a minister of a department and a member of cabinet who leads the government, and at the same time having to maintain his seat from his electorate like a congressman or woman. So it's basically like being a secretary and a congressman or woman all at once, and is a difficult job, which is why they need a chief of staff. So I managed a team of 20 people, and their roles were communications, policy, parliamentary affairs, operations, and all of them working to serve the minister. I would describe my role as, part working within the Department of Natural Resources Canada that does Canada's equivalent of DOE, working with those 5,000 or so public servants to develop and implement energy policy for Canada. And then also supporting the minister in the House of Commons and bringing bills into law. And that was also a really fascinating part of the job. You asked about a day in the life. Usually, we would speak as a team most days to make sure we were on the same page. Every day I was looking at 2 calendars at the same time, my own and my minister's. And his calendar was full every day by the minute. So deeply scheduled that I got very, very used to the precious commodity that is time. And I think for people in those senior roles of political office, the commodity that is the most precious is their time, and it's really our duty to manage it carefully. So lots of phone calls, emails, meetings, often on the road. I traveled with my boss all around the country and many other countries around the world. No 2 day was the same, but it always involved a lot of texting. Is what I would say. A lot of text messages. My thumbs were always tired at the end of the day because so much of the job is so fast-paced that I'm responding by text to journalists, to the Prime Minister's office, to any one of the provinces in the country, to mayors, to leaders of companies, CEOs, to members of parliament, to my counterparts, chiefs of staff, to other ministers. There's a lot of transacting, often in short emails or text messages, essentially. And at the same time, I was trying to work to develop policies and implement policies that would really benefit Canada and Canadians. And that's when I had my phone in one hand and my notebook in the other. And my notebook really kept me grounded in what are my priorities, what are we trying to get done today, are we using our time the best way that we can?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, focus is really tricky. Time is everybody's commodity, obviously. And quick funny story. When I was a reporter at a show called The Crusaders, I did a story about hospital bill overcharges. And one of my favorite story examples was a patient who had been charged for 32 hours a day of respiratory care. And I looked at the hospital. I was like, "Can I have your day? I could use 32 hours in a day." How did you get 32 hours in a day? So, yeah, I'll be curious to see if, like, 20 years from now, there's some element that's evolved from everybody using their thumbs. There's
I think I
something or
might be
another.
developing carpal tunnel in all seriousness. I've started doing some physio, but I think at least going back to law is more typing on a keyboard and a little bit less running around with a phone, which is good.
Yeah, no, that's totally cool. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. And what I love about what you said is it also gives us obviously an idea of what the minister does and how the system works. So that's a really good overview. Um, you played a key role, as I said in the introduction, in developing Canada's clean electricity strategy, critical minerals strategy, and sustainable jobs plan, which is a mouthful. But tell us about that and how it is or is not similar to, say, the Inflation Reduction Act or some comparative in the US. We have audiences all over the world, but I think a lot of people, mostly in the US, but a lot of people are kind of familiar with the IRA, so it's a good model.
Yeah. So the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill are now well-known and well-branded pieces of climate policy. They include funding programs, regulatory changes, other policy developments. They are world-changing. They are revolutionary in so many ways. To compare them to Canada. So Canada has a lot, I would say the majority of the same components of the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. They are just unfortunately in Canada not branded quite as clearly. They are sprinkled throughout more than a dozen different strategies that are frankly more difficult to remember and have not really received the same single media attention. And they haven't existed in omnibus bills. They've mostly lived in federal government, Canadian government policy documents or in federal budgets. And because those policies are sprinkled everywhere, I think a lot of people around the world, and actually Canadians included, don't realize how many elements of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill we have in Canada. Some of those elements actually predate what the Biden government did because Trudeau came into power in 2015. And one of his first major policies was the Investing in Canada infrastructure program, which is a $33 billion infrastructure program, which by Canadian standards is quite large. And they also, that actually $33 billion was part of a broader cross-Canadian government $180 billion Investing in Canada plan. And those infrastructure programs are in many ways similar to what is in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It's roads, bridges, but also clean energy projects and clean technology and investing in new technologies as well, like hydrogen or carbon capture and those sorts of things. So some of it predates. We also in Canada have invested under the current federal government, a historic amount in public transit. And that's included about 3 billion in zero emission buses, which is actually more per capita than the United States is investing in zero emission buses under the Inflation Reduction Act. So we actually had a zero emission bus program earlier. It was for 5,000 zero emission buses, both public transit and school buses, and we have contracts for those buses in place, actually over a year before the United States did. So in some ways, we just haven't received credit for those things that we've done. But there's other aspects of the IRA that Canada had not implemented and then copied later. And the best example of that is the investment tax credits. Our approach before the Inflation Reduction Act was primarily focused on grant programs. And grant programs are very slow because you have to create a program, design the terms and conditions, open the application, wait for people to apply, help people apply, review the application, and then make an announcement. And frankly, they're great for politicians because they get to cut a ribbon, but they take a really long time. So they take a very, very long time. So after the Inflation Reduction Act, the Canadian business community was understandably sort of saying, how come they can do it so quickly in the United States? And so we decided to also implement some very significant investment tax credits in Canada. And they have been slower to roll out, significantly slower than in the United States, for a variety of reasons. But in Canada, we now have investment tax credits for clean hydrogen, for carbon capture, for clean technologies, for clean technology manufacturing, and for clean electricity. And a new one that's just been announced in this most recent budget for electric vehicles. So that's something where we need to learn from the United States on its ability to do those investment tax credits very, very quickly. So it's difficult because I've tried actually writing out the full size of the investments. And in some areas, I would say Canada's investments are, especially on a per capita basis, we're about a tenth or so of the United States population, completely on par. And then there are other areas where the United States has just totally outspent us in certain areas that it's actually going to make it very difficult for Canada to remain competitive. And that's why we've had to invest significant amounts in electric vehicle manufacturing, for example, just to barely keep up with the absolutely ginormous investments that have gone into that area in the United States. And then just one other thing I'll mention, one of the big differences between Canada and the United States in climate policy spending broadly is that unlike the United States, Canada has a national carbon pricing system. So we have a carbon pricing system that sets a national minimum standard. There's a retail price for retail fuels, including gasoline for cars, and there's also a industrial price that applies directly to industry. In some provinces, Quebec has its own cap and trade system that's actually linked with California's, and that is a system that meets Canada's minimum standard for carbon pricing. The province of British Columbia has been an amazing leader. They have a carbon tax system as well. And then we have certain provinces where the federal government has imposed a carbon pricing system on those provinces. And those greenhouse gas reductions in our climate plan are significantly less expensive than using grants or tax measures in order to achieve the same reductions. So they're much more economic.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and that could be a longer conversation. I mean, carbon pricing is really an interesting topic that needs to be explored worldwide more. Are there changes other than carbon pricing, which is a political hot potato in the U.S.? Are there any other policies, systems, legislation that Canada has put in place from what that you think the U.S. would benefit from as much as you know about the U.S. system?
Mm-hmm. For me, the number one would be phasing out coal. Like, just hands down. In Canada, Ontario, which is our biggest, most populated province, phased out coal in 2014. That was very early, and that was a very bold decision. And then when the current government came into power in 2015, they also made a commitment, which was made ultimately in 2016, to phase out coal across all of Canada by 2030. And that, at the time in 2016, was an amazingly ambitious goal to say that the whole country is going to phase out coal by by 2030. And actually, just last week, one of our other provinces, Alberta, managed to phase out coal and close their last coal plant, literally last week. And they've phased out coal now 6 years ahead of schedule, 6 years before that 2030 deadline. And, we still have a few more regions in the country that are dependent on coal. We're working on that federally, provincially. It's a challenge. It's very challenging for those communities. It's very challenging for those workers. Of course, you need to make sure that there are other affordable and reliable sources of power, and the United States is facing those challenges too. But Canada, I think, has been under-recognized for its leadership on coal phase-out, and was a huge part of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, founded it at the global level with the United Kingdom. And there's now more than 50 countries that have signed on to phasing out coal by 2030, in part thanks to Canada's leadership.
Wow, I love that. That's a longer conversation, my dear. Yeah, because I'm glad you mentioned the impact on communities and jobs, et cetera, because that's really been the issue. And of course, some of the members of Congress have personal investments in coal and other fossil fuels, and so that kicks in, I'm sure, as well, consciously or unconsciously. And obviously, their constituents do too. I mean, I lived in North Dakota when I talked about when we met, and they have every type of energy like Canada does, but even in just one state, they have everything, including fossil fuels. Um, so I could talk to you about all of that for like another 2 hours, but let me ask you a couple other things. How does it, how does the plan or any of the plans that you're privy to or played a role in, how do they actually address climate resilience? A key part or key parts, if you will, plural, of the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Bill, and even the CHIPS and Science Act, and even going back to the recovery plan as well during COVID, have specific components for increasing the resilience of communities from climate change, right? So, for example, even I'm sure you heard about the bridge in Baltimore that collapsed when the cargo ship hit it. That is being rebuilt in part with sustainable materials and different types of steel, et cetera, et cetera. And so, when they rebuild things, when they fix them, they're doing it in a way that increases the resilience as well as reduces the carbon footprint. Mm-hmm. So are there policies or incentives for doing something similar in Canada? I realize, it's interesting because you've got this vast space, but as you say, 1/10 of the population, so it's a really different paradigm.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you raised the other side of the climate coin, as I like to call it. And I think when I talk to people about climate change who have no experience in this area, I remind them that climate is really just about two things: carbon and hazards, essentially. And the carbon creates hazards, and unfortunately, often the hazards create more carbon. And it's a bit of a vicious cycle. But in Canada, we have a national adaptation strategy. So like I said, for all of these elements that the United States has sort of gotten on with it with the Inflation Reduction Act, Canada has a strategy for that. Is sort of the joke. Like we've got a strategy for that. So we have a national adaptation strategy, and because Canada is a federation, the strategy is a very high-level framework that all of the provinces and territories have also endorsed. And we, in addition to the national strategy, have an action plan specific to the federal government, and each individual province either has or is encouraged to have its own action plan for their own region of the country. So it would be the equivalent of each state having their own action plan. So that's sort of the governance structure that we've set up in Canada to address adaptation issues. And in that action plan, there are a very long list of measures, funding programs, policies, and I would say there's a number of them that I find exciting, and also targets, actually, which are very difficult to set on the adaptation side, but need to be set to improve resiliency of communities. But one of the programs that I think is been the most successful in Canada is called the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. And it's simply a funding program where a municipality, an Indigenous community, or a province can apply to the federal government to receive money for a resiliency project. And it's usually to improve flood resiliency in a highly populated area, often an underserved area, or it's to improve wildfire resilience in an area where there's a lot of wildfire risk, or hurricane hazard prevention as well, a big issue on our Atlantic coast. So it's really any climate resilience project. It generally doesn't touch on extreme heat related projects because that more falls under another strategy, our green building strategy, where we address issues related to extreme heat in buildings. But it is a very comprehensive document, and probably one people don't know enough about. The wildfires in Canada are bad and getting worse, and your American listeners may remember the smoke that traveled from Canada down to the United States last summer. In some parts of Canada, smoke like that is very common every summer and has been getting worse. But last summer was particularly bad because our biggest cities like Toronto were experiencing smoke in a way that they hadn't, and were sort of getting a taste of what it's like to live in other parts of Canada where wildfires are much more common. So anyway, we're increasing funding mostly from the federal government to the provinces for hiring and training firefighters, and especially Indigenous firefighters and firefighters that live in remote communities, and also ensuring that they can buy equipment like water bombers and whatever other equipment that they need. There's quite a few programs like that, but it's a bottomless pit. Like, you could spend so much money on that and you wouldn't have enough. So it's difficult for the federal government in the adaptation space because there's just an absolutely unlimited amount of need in this area.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I interviewed Vanessa Chan, Chief Commercialization Officer of the Department of Energy, and she told me that the IRA alone, I believe, is designed to trigger it. The three bills together give or incentivize $3 trillion worth of funding and incentives, but they are designed to trigger an additional 30 trillion. And that's just to address the clean energy transition. That doesn't even touch. I mean, think about it, every single community has something they need done, right? I mean, you're right. It's totally a bottomless pit. I mean, that's a great way to put it. One of the uniquenesses of Canada is the mineral issue. So you guys have, and you personally, and all your work and every role have focused on a lot on minerals. I believe you helped develop that as part of the plans. And we know that minerals are really critical for the transition to a clean energy, net zero, climate resilient economy, electric vehicles, types of nuclear energy, all kinds of supply chains, et cetera. But they're also, there's a danger there. There's a danger in the mining of them. There's a danger in where we get them from. There's a danger to the communities where they are. I mean, it's one of those really delicate situations. So how is Canada dealing with with meeting the supply chain needs for minerals?
I think, like our allies and the rest of the Western world, Canada has, in the past couple of years, woken up to the threat of Chinese ownership of critical minerals and their processing. And I just want to be blunt that it's a threat, and it's a very serious one. Canada and all the G7 countries have now started to take this issue extremely seriously. Without strategy, coordination, investment, we will be putting ourselves at a painful disadvantage in terms of not just the energy transition, but just geopolitically. So it is in Canada's best interest, it's in the United States' best interest to be thinking hard about critical minerals. Canada has its own critical minerals list. It's similar to the United States one, but has a few differences. And each of our provinces have their own critical minerals lists as well that are somewhat similar. Canada has 34 minerals on its critical minerals list, and those are all minerals that can be produced in Canada somewhere. Every region of Canada has some deposit of critical minerals other than Prince Edward Island, sorry, PEI. And so it's actually also a huge economic opportunity. It's a huge economic opportunity for Indigenous people in Canada as well. And in the role of Indigenous people is central and critical to the development of these minerals. There's really no question about that. So my view is, the federal government in Canada has invested $3.8 billion. That is not enough. It's not enough to ensure that we are going to unlock the minerals we need to unlock. Our biggest challenge in Canada is not, we have the minerals, we have the skills, we have the ability to extract the minerals. Our issue is investment. It's a pure investment issue, and Canadian allies should be investing in Canadian critical minerals so that we can secure them from friendly countries. That's really my view. And then on the processing side of things, we need to be working together as well. There's a lot of opportunity in critical minerals processing as well, I would say. But it's interesting you mentioned critical minerals too. Canada is sort of an interesting case because we have critical minerals, we have all these sources of energy that you mentioned that we've already sort of talked about. Coal, and then we have oil and gas, we have nuclear, we have renewables, we have onshore wind and offshore wind. It's almost sometimes like Canada is a bit of a microcosm of the rest of the world in terms of where the energy transition is going. And you mentioned one United State of the United States that is also a bit of a microcosm. I think Canada has a lot of lessons because we are trying it all in terms of the different energy sources, and we are pretty representative of a lot of the challenges other countries are facing too.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. Lots to dig in there too. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I was going to ask you this before, and Canada, of course, is so huge. S&P Global reported that solar is actually exceeding wind now as the single largest source of new generating capacity in Canada. What do you think that's due to, since you talked about the whole portfolio that the country has? Is that incentives? Is that technology? I mean, China has, been dumping panels on all of us, right, for super
Mm-hmm.
cheap. So what do you
Yep.
attribute that growth to in
Oh,
solar?
yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but if I had to hazard a guess, I do think the incentives is a part of it. But the sunniest province in all of Canada is actually Alberta. And Alberta is the only province that has a deregulated electricity market. And that deregulated electricity market that isn't centrally regulated in the way that most other provinces are, has allowed new project development to occur extremely quickly, and that has meant solar projects. So we have a program in the federal government called the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways Program. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. That program has funded dozens of solar projects all throughout Alberta, but there are incentives provincially in the province, and like you said, I think that there is some of that cheap technology. The technology is becoming a lot less expensive, but again, the challenge there is can we find somewhere to manufacture those solar panels? Would be really helpful somewhere closer, to Canada, and just diversify those sources of manufacturing for solar panels is critical.
Yeah. I did an interview, I don't know if you listened to this one, but with a woman named Laura Pagliarulo, who has a really interesting business model. It's called Solar REIT. It's a REIT, real estate investment trust. And what they do, it's not manufacturing solar panels, but it's helping farmers who either their land is in distress for some reason or another, whether it's tariffs or climate change or whatever, to lease their land to Solar REIT. Solar REIT puts solar panels on them and then helps capture the solar energy and provide community solar to communities that want renewable energy. And it's a great win-win-win-win-win to me because the farmers don't have to give up their land. and they're
Yeah.
still getting revenue from it, and they don't have to farm it, right? And they're not losing it, so they can take it back or whatever. So it just pops into my head as you're talking about that. Another kind of innovative idea, right, for making this transition work. You've talked about the impact on communities and throughout the broader economy. So, talk a little bit about the jobs created from this transition from the plans that you've talked about, and any initiatives that you're aware of that support women-owned businesses or indigenous-owned businesses and communities benefiting in the U.S. There's incentives for you giving contracts to women-owned businesses, but there's also the Justice 40 criteria where 40% of the benefits have to go to a disadvantaged community, and there's a whole bunch of criteria for that. So, talk about the broader economic effect of these plans and how those effects are being directed, if you will.
If I had to compare the IRA to Canadian policies, I would say the IRA does a better job of putting an environmental justice lens on funding than we do in Canada, except for on Indigenous matters. So I think Canadian non-Indigenous underserved communities are probably slightly worse off than they would have been under the IRA. However, the Indigenous benefits that have flowed from Canadian programs have been very good and on par, if not probably better. And I was meeting with my former boss, Minister Wilkinson, with Secretary Granholm. We were actually talking about the U.S. Tribal Loan Guarantee Program because that is a program that's in the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's a great program. The challenge was that they weren't getting a lot of uptake because none of the Indigenous communities had projects that were ready to submit. And so Secretary Granholm said to my boss, how do you get the projects from the Indigenous communities going? Because we have this great program, but no one's applying. And so we talked to her about what we've done with funding organizations, mostly Indigenous-led industry organizations, like the First Nations Project Coalition or the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. And those organizations work directly with Indigenous partners to make sure that they can develop the projects in the first place. They can develop what equity stake that nation may want in a project that someone else is developing, or create one from the ground up. And often those Indigenous communities don't have the funding or the ability or connections to hire lawyers and accountants and consultants that are needed to put together a solid proposal for a project. So actually that same group, the First Nations Major Project Coalition, went down to DC and met with the Department of Energy. And now they're trying to replicate that same model in the United States to try to have more projects in the pipeline for the Tribal Loan Guarantee Program, which is fantastic and a great example of partnership between our two countries.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, it's always outreach. I did a project for the Department of Energy to increase the number of women-owned businesses that applied, not so much, not for these, it wasn't around yet, but for the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, because women-owned businesses were just not applying. Same thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of shoe leather, it's a lot of going around and talking to these people and saying, they want to help you, and here's how you can do it. So people need education. It's really, really, really important. So I want to ask you a couple other things and then I like to get career advice, as you know, from all my guests. But I have to ask the $64 trillion question, which is what happens to the climate plan and all these great policies and plans if Ottawa changes parties in the upcoming election, which is right on our heels, actually. Record this, as I recall.
Yeah, so we're in a minority government at the moment in Canada. We have a parliamentary democracy, and in our minority government, that means that we could have an election this year, but we also could have an election next year. Our election deadline is October 20th, 2025, so we don't know when our election will be, unlike in the United States where you have a firm set date for your election. So we don't know exactly when the election will be. The current government government has been in power since 2015, which is a long time, and it would be very historic for our current prime minister to win a fourth term. He has won 3 elections already, so that would be a very large number of elections. So I can't predict what's going to happen in the Canadian election. I don't know, but there's no question that the Canadian economic policy, political landscape in the area of energy and climate has changed so dramatically since before 2015 that I think it would be impossible for the country to sort of revert to the policies of before this government. So I don't think there's a chance of a complete obliteration of that progress. Will there be adjustments? Yes, and some of them I think will be welcome. I don't want to say too much about what I would advise someone in the upcoming campaign, but I do think that there are opportunities to continue working on and tweaking. One thing we've done in Canadian climate policy is, in the past several years, is try everything, like everything. We have grant programs, we have financing, we have tax measures, we have investment tax credits. We've sort of given it all a shot, and some of those tools seem to work better than others, and in a lot of ways we've created almost too many options to the point of confusion, which has been a little bit of a problem. Too many choices, it turns out, can actually be more difficult for the private sector to be able to follow. But another one of those tools, for example, is the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which I do hope is going to survive the next election. The UK has already copied this same model. They've created a UK infrastructure bank and actually poached one of the staff members from the Canada Infrastructure Bank to help run it. But the Canada Infrastructure Bank has done dozens of projects now, and they've been a successful organization that has operated arm's length from government, made their own projects decisions, and really helped spur investment in the clean economy.
Oh, that's great. I love that. And I think it's frankly all of these technologies and all of these this transition is already embedded in the market writ large in every country. And I mean, first of all, it's profitable, it's fun, people, it's making lives better. And the people who care about making money foremost are making money foremost. And we could talk about that for about 10 years, but and I think I agree with you that the train has left the station, if you will, and it would be pretty. In fact, there's people talking about, if the U.S. election goes to the other party, that there's claims of reversing the IRA, but there's so many investments that go into red states. There's so many companies that are already doing this. There's so much money out there. There's so many jobs being created, et cetera, that it's embedded already. And I don't see huge dramatic changes, but I'm also hoping that we stay with the current regime, and that's not going to surprise any of my listeners.
And it may also be some continuing in a similar direction, but under a different name or under a different brand, right? And that's okay. That's politics. That doesn't bother me, as long as we're still investing in the areas of Canada's economy that are likely to grow and that are, good bets and that will help address the climate crisis and create good jobs for Canadians. It doesn't bother me a lot about what you call it. But I think one of the most interesting things about the Inflation Reduction Act is that it doesn't have the word climate in the name at all. And that may have been part of that marketing that has made it easier for people to understand it and to be comfortable with it. And in Canada, we just haven't had that same sort of branding of our policies. We have each of these individual strategies, but we haven't had that one brand that we've assigned to this work.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I mean, there are a lot of reasons I assume that was done. They didn't ask my opinion when they gave it. Just really quickly, one of the things that I think is important in this conversation is the speed of innovation, right? So energy innovation technologies are evolving basically daily. So you're an interesting person because you've been on both sides of this. How how do you suggest that policymakers draft energy and infrastructure policies and legislation that stand the test of new technologies? There's a lot we don't know about yet, right? That's coming down the pike, and we want to incentivize those new ideas, but we don't want to eliminate them. Like then some of the legal challenges that are coming up now in the US are saying, well, that doesn't apply to this. Well, how do you know? Right?
Yeah,
It didn't
that's
exist
a
when
great
that law
question.
was drafted.
Yeah, I think the goal should be to draft policies that are focused on outcomes and that are, as much as possible, technology agnostic, which is difficult to do, but you can do it. And let me give you an example. So in Canada, we have an investment tax credit for hydrogen. And there was some discussion in Canada about whether that tax credit should only apply to hydrogen from renewables, which would not be technology agnostic. It would be focused only on hydrogen that comes from renewables, and hydrogen from natural gas would be excluded. But the problem with that is if over time hydrogen from natural gas can become so low carbon through electrification, through carbon capture, through other methods, then you can actually get to a very similar and potentially one day the same place in terms of emissions. So therefore, we instead drafted that investment tax credit to be technology agnostic and instead made it the criteria focused on emissions intensity of the hydrogen itself. So focus on the outcome instead of the technology, and that way you're not excluding technologies that don't exist yet. So the EU, on the other hand, has been focused exclusively on hydrogen from renewables, but they haven't adopted this sort of carbon intensity focus to hydrogen. Whereas I think in the United States, and again, my boss and Secretary Granholm spoke about this, it does make a lot of sense to help spur innovation especially for those regions of the country that are abundant in natural gas, and to ensure that investments are being made in hydrogen technologies more broadly, which may be just more economical from natural gas at the beginning. So anyway, that's what I would say, is try to focus policy drafting on the outcome. It's not a policymaker's responsibility to know where technology is going to go. It's the policymaker's responsibility to know where we want to get in terms of a policy outcome.
That's a really good point. They're focused on the point of the policy, the purpose of the policy, not on the how to, not on how the market's going to do it specifically. I have to take those into consideration because there's always those bloody unintended consequences, but we'll deal with those. Um, One more question before we get to career advice, and that is, let's flip the chair a little bit. So, what insights would you suggest for the private sector? You're now working with clients, you're on the other end, you've done this before. What insights do you have? What suggestions do you have for the private sector on how to work with the public sector to advance clean energy, net zero economy policies, and to create, because what creates that certainty that the market demands is regulations and legislation that make sense, that have this flexibility, right? That don't tie your hands in terms of the technology. But a lot of times regulations lag the technology, and they lag what companies want to do. And so we have to educate a lot of times the policymakers. So we recognize that every country and every culture is different, but humans are humans, and there are a lot of similarities. So what would you suggest to people in the private sector who want to help the public sector create policies and legislation that supports this but doesn't slow down unnecessarily?
Mm-hmm. The private sector should do their very best to understand the policy context in which those regulations, programs, initiatives are being created. So I find often, and it makes sense, it's because a lot of people in the private sector haven't worked in government. They're not thinking about what the government is trying to accomplish. And sometimes the government doesn't accomplish it in the best way, but they're trying. They're trying to get to a particular goal. So I think for the private sector, instead of just focusing on what's wrong with a specific regulation, you got it wrong, this is ruining my business, that business and the private sector should be focusing on, okay, what was the government trying to accomplish, and how can I help them accomplish that same broad goal without ruining my business? And there's a difference, I think, between understanding that policy context and just being frustrated with a specific change that the government has made. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that the private sector needs to communicate with government and be clear with government. As someone that worked at the senior ranks of government for many years, we listen to industry associations a lot. We listen to businesses, individual businesses, but industry associations are very useful because they can translate the needs and the wants and the concerns of all of the different companies in their sector into government speak, into a language that we understand. And if an industry association says all 400 companies that are in my industry association are all extremely concerned about this one thing, there's a very high chance that the government's going to do something about that. So, having an industry association that you can participate in, that has your back and is advocating for you, to governments, federally, provincially, at every level, is really, really valuable. And I think businesses don't always see the benefits of that, but there is absolutely a huge benefit.
I appreciate that. You just have to make sure that the association actually is aligned with your values, because some of them
Yes.
are not, right? I guess you can be aligned on certain things and not on others. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. So before I let you go, I like to get some career advice for everybody, particularly for mid-career women. And this is particularly unique for you because I know one of the things that I did not say in the introduction that you're working on is this program called Equal by 30, a campaign to accelerate gender equality and diversity, specifically in the clean energy transition, and to close the gender gap by 2030. So tell us a little bit about Equal by 30 and share some career advice for women in mid-career, figure at least 10 years of experience, maybe more, a woman who knows what she's good at, is educated, is ambitious, wants to make money, wants to advance and make a difference, and does not want to have to trade any of those things off.
So, Equal by 30 is a campaign that was started by the International Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Ministerial, and it's about accelerating gender equality and diversity more broadly in the energy transition, and ideally to close the gender gap in the energy sector, both public, private, by 2030. And that's a lofty goal. It's very difficult to measure, but it's an important one because it really puts the spotlight on the gender inequality in the energy sector. I went to a lot of G7 meetings, International Energy Agency meetings during my time in government, and even at the senior ranks of the Canadian government, more often than not, it was male individuals who held those positions in this area. So far, all G7 countries have signed on to Equal by 30, including the United States, and over 200 different companies have also signed on, and companies, organizations, some other governments as well. And it's, I think, an important initiative, and it's one that requires the signatory to put a framework in place and to create some plans on how you're going to improve gender equality. And it's also a network to share best practices. Canada has been, I think, a leader on Equal by 30. We actually just convinced the European Union to sign on earlier this year, which was a great success. And still a really long way to go on promoting women in the energy sector. For broader career advice, for anyone, women especially, who are interested in the energy and climate space, I would say that you shouldn't feel that you need to choose between the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector. I was under the mistaken belief as a student that I had to pick a lane, and I recall being very distressed about having to pick one of those lanes at an early stage in my career because I was so interested in all of them. And I actually, at many points, sort of was concerned about what sort of a summer position I was going to do, because I thought it would then determine the job I had after I was done university, and then I would be, a private sector person forever, or a government person forever, or a nonprofit person forever. And it turns out, as I have developed in my career, that could not be further from the truth. And if you want to, and I've done it, you can just bounce between them. And that seems to be increasingly more acceptable. And it's also really, really useful. Because now I have experience working at the Canadian Embassy in DC, for the federal government, for different private sector law firms. I've done lots of pro bono work for different nonprofit organizations as well. And I've been able to continue to sort of build my expertise in the energy and climate space, but from multiple different perspectives. And I constantly find that when I am advising a client, I'm drawing on that government or nonprofit experience. When I was in the government, I was drawing on that private sector experience. So my advice would be to just not feel that you need to pick one of those lanes, and to, take the risk to bounce between those different segments of our economy.
Love that. That's really great. And I think that goes to kind of to take that a little bit step further. And I'm also hearing you say, and that is you get ideas. That's where the innovation also comes from, because you can apply a solution that might have worked in X to Y, right? I mean, I've done that in the private sector, and in a book I'm writing and other things, is experiences I had at American Express might apply to a global nonprofit that I'm working with, or vice versa, right? And so even though there might not only be an industry difference, but a size difference or a market difference, it kind of triggers, well, we can't do exactly this, but it kind of makes me think that maybe we can do that, and it helps create more creative energy and more creative ideas. One of the things I read somewhere that you suggested, which I definitely do not do, is you said do fewer things really well rather than dividing your energy between too many things. And I mean, everything I do evolves around women and energy, sustainability, and climate, and this whole space. But I feel like I do a lot of different things.
I struggle with the same thing. I struggle with that too. I actually recently wrote a list of all of my, I call them extracurricular activities, my non-client work. And
Oh my God.
I know, and I cut half of them. And I messaged a bunch of organizations and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take up this initiative. And it felt great, but it was very hard. It's very hard.
How did you decide what to cut?
My gut, which is how I make almost all my decisions.
Oh, cool. I love it. Any final thoughts before I let you get back to your life?
Um, any final thoughts? No, just thank you so much for being the host of this amazing podcast. And I hope that after today, you get some more Canadian listeners who I'm sure will be just as interested in all of the topics that you cover as all of your other listeners. So thank you so much, Joan.
Oh, you're welcome, Claire. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies podcast, Claire Seaborn, and for what you have contributed, not even just to Canada, but to the whole world, because your solutions also become a model for the rest of us. And obviously, we're all in this together. And everything you've done and continue to do to help save the planet and create cool new technologies that make our lives better too. And good luck with your new job at Tories.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Claire Seaborn, former Chief of Staff to the Canadian Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, now a partner at Tories law firm. So what did Claire say that resonated with you? What lessons do you think the U.S. and other countries can adapt from Canada? Post it to us on Twitter or Threads or on LinkedIn, and find me at Joan Michelson, and send us any questions there as well, including for Claire. And you may win a complimentary 30-minute coaching session with me. And please subscribe to our mailing list to stay abreast of our amazing guests, like Claire, our articles and career advice and events, places where I'm speaking, where maybe we can meet. So please subscribe on our website, electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.